So first of all, Noah, I love that you brought in the Haftarah portion in your Devar Torah. That is rarely done in a Devar Torah. And this one from Zechariah, particularly the line you chose to focus on, is especially beloved and important. The idea, as you said, that if you use your spirit and your beliefs instead of physical force, then you can change someone's opinion or find common ground instead of going to war, has inspired many generations of Jews seeking peace. And then I love that you took a deeper look at the word ruach in the Torah. It just so happens that I wrote an entire book about the word ruach in the Torah and its meanings as wind and breath and spirit, and where and how it shows up in the Torah and the Hebrew Bible and what we can learn from it. Your idea that human beings could tap into the creative spirit of God, the aspect of God that created the world, to build a new world ourselves, is very much what I think the word ruach is coming to say to us in the Torah. In fact, this idea shows up in your portion, not just in the cloud over the tabernacle that you taught us about, but also in an episode with Moses and prophecy. Moses needs more leaders to help him guide the Israelites. So God tells him to gather 70 elders to help him lead. He does so. And the Torah tells us that God takes some of the ruach that is on Moses and puts it upon the 70 elders. So first of all, we learn from this that human beings can have some of God's ruach, this wind, breath, spirit, on us or in us. We also learn that this ruach is not finite because Moses retains it upon himself and there's enough for 70 other people to also have it on them. When the elders receive the ruach, they begin to prophesy, meaning God's voice or intention or spirit starts to come through them. And then something very interesting happens. Two people who remained in the camp, who were not with the 70, but whose names, Eldad and Medad, were recorded, they also start to prophesy. So apparently the ruach is upon them as well, even though they were not in the group who received the ruach that had been taken from Moses. This seems to suggest that there were other ways that people could receive or have ruach upon them or within them. The commentator Chizkuni, who lived in France in the 13th century, points out that, quote, the 70 elders were never mentioned by name in the Torah portion, whereas these two men, Eldad and Medad, who at first glance appeared to be rejects, were named. Chizkuni posits that the reason they were named is that their ability to prophesy outlasted Moses. Quote, the prophetic powers granted these men survived Moses, as their prophetic power was not a branch of Moses's Holy Spirit. Their ruach came from God directly. When this happens in the Torah portion, a youth runs to Moses to tell him that these two people are prophesying, and Joshua says, restrain them. And Chizkuni translates this outburst as, my Lord Moses, lock them up. Joshua wanted these two men put under house arrest so that their prophecies would not become public, Chizkuni says. And then in response, Moses says one of my favorite things that he says in all of Torah. Are you wrought up on my account? In other words, do you think this is a challenge to my authority or an insult to me that they're prophesying? Then he says, quote, I only wish that all of God's people were prophets, that God put ruach upon all of them. Maimonides later goes on to classify the different kinds of prophecy and how they relate to ruach, and teaches that many people can have ruach upon them. And ruach can show up in many different kinds of ways in human beings, such as persuasive speech, or physical feats, or extraordinary vision, or a special quality of leadership that we might call charisma. This is kind of how you're interpreting Zechariah's message, Noah, that ruach that could make us have the vision and the leadership to house people who have no homes, or clothe people who have no clothes, or make peace between people who fight. Another quality of ruach that's important to point out is that unlike neshama, which is each person's particular soul, ruach, because it's also breath and wind, is something that is shared. It can exist upon us, within us, but also between us in the way the wind moves through trees, or breath is shared among all breathing beings. So if some people can have ruach upon them, and ruach is shared like wind and breath, it stands to reason that all people can have ruach upon them. And this leads me to your brilliant and courageous Devar Torah, Mia. Because you are right. Not a lot of women play leading roles in the Torah. And you are right. Jewish tradition is often sexist. And you are right. Jewish tradition often disparages women, discounts women, shames women, or blames women, as Miriam was unfairly blamed and shamed in the passage you described. And you are right that Miriam was a leader of her people. In fact, she was a prophet. According to the Midrash, she is the one who made Moses' birth possible by convincing her parents to have another child. And she's the one who had a vision of who he would become. And she's the one who protected him when he was a baby in that basket on the river, enabling him to have a relationship with his mother, Yocheved, even though he grew up in Pharaoh's palace. And she's the one who has a magical well that provides water for the people as they wander in the wilderness. Just as you say, Mia, we can and we should look deeper into our texts and tell the full story of the women we find there. But most of the women are simply invisible. They were made invisible by the men who edited the Torah. We don't know what stories or encounters with God didn't make it into the final text. We don't know much about half of the population of our biblical ancestors. Surely many of them had ruach upon them, and we are missing out because they were discounted and excluded from the Torah. And that right there is the cost of human ranking and supremacist thinking. When we think some human beings are more valuable than others, we miss out on the ruach that is upon that entire subset of the population. We miss out on all of the creative, healing, peacemaking, transformational power that they have to bring to our world. There are so many ways we can see this happen in our world right now. In particular, I'm thinking about what's happening in the Middle East. This happens when Hamas and their supporters dehumanize and aim to annihilate Jews. This happens when the Israeli government cages, bombs, and occupies Palestinians for 54 years. This happens when anti-Semites beat, punch, and kick Jews on the streets of Brooklyn, London, or Germany, spread anti-Semitic slander on social media and in our schools, throw stones through synagogue windows, scrawl in chalk, "White Lives Matter." That happened on the sidewalk in front of this synagogue this Wednesday. Now, I should say that from security footage, it was clear that it was a spontaneous, unplanned action, not coordinated or representing an ongoing threat, but still. It happens with white supremacy and with sexism and with poverty and Islamophobia, and in whatever form we value one human more than another human. And in our congregation, we are working on so many of those things at the same time. Anytime any people are not allowed to live or be safe or belong or have what they need to thrive, we are being robbed of the ruach that is upon them and the way that they would uniquely express that ruach in the world. We are being robbed of peacemakers. We are being robbed of healers. We're being robbed of artists, of meaning makers, of truth tellers, of inventors, of problem solvers, of visionaries. And that is why we must redress the sexism of the Torah. And that is why we must ensure that both Palestinians and Jews have safety and self-determination and freedom. And that is why we will continue to work together for the dignity of all humanity, not by might, not by power, but by my ruach, says God. Shabbat Shalom.